Hi Alexa, it's Fabiola here, and I'm going to talk about your design. So you already watched the first video that I sent to the group, and that was where I actually just gave you some suggestions for how I would have improved on what you actually did. But what I'm going to do now, and I got this inspiration actually from our member Jersey Dude, he has taken the time to also create a set of videos that I'm currently uploading to the group about how he would have approached digitizing this logo for you. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm also going to be using the Hatch embroidery program because that's what you are currently testing, and it's also the program that you created this EMB file for that I have on the screen here. So I already talked about how I had mentioned that I had done some suggestions for you. So if I had been the one to create this design, this is how I would digitize it. I'm going to select all of your objects and I'm going to delete them. I'm keeping the clip art on the screen, and I'm going to just right click on it, and I'm going to lock it in position so that it doesn't move on the screen as I'm digitizing here. And I'm first of all going to address how I would have digitized the word Manisoft. Now you already know what my preference is, right? Because I mentioned that in video number 1. I would use the lettering tool tab. I would have used one of the built-in fonts and just typed in the whole word Manisoft with my caps turned on my computer. All right, so that's what I would have done. The default font that came up on my program right here was Block 2, and I just want you to notice how similar in appearance it is to your lettering. You know, the letter M reaches all the way down to the bottom, just like yours. The A, is just a very simple block style of lettering. There are a couple of other block styles that are available in the Hatch 2 program. You've got block number 2, you've got block number 1, you've got, a couple of different ones. Number 1 wasn't quite as good, number 2 was very good. So I would have just stuck with that one rather than moving down into a true type font, because that was just going to take up a lot of time and skill in order to get it to work nicely. So there are a couple of different tools that you can do right here where you can actually just adjust some of these letters so that they look a little bit more similar to your style that you all have created in your logo. So one of the things you can do, I talked about this earlier, was that you could select this object and turn on your reshape tool. And when you do that, you have the ability to move your arrows to change the distance between the letters and adjust the spacing on them. All right, one of the other things that you can do, if you don't want to do it manually like that, is over in your lettering tool tab, down toward the bottom, you can also play with the letter spacing in here. You can also adjust the slants and different things on some of these letters, okay? So that is 2 different ways that you can adjust the spacing of each letter within that toolbar right there. All right, you can do it here, or you can do it manually through the reshape tool. Now the other thing that we can do is I can select, so let's just say for example that I want to play with the letter S because yours looked a little bit wider and a little bit more squishy than what this one is. So if it mattered that much to you, what you could do is select the letter. When I did that pink triangle or diamond that I was on, I just clicked on it with my left mouse button. It turned purple, and when that happened, all these other little symbols became available. Things that I can do to change the appearance of this letter all by itself. So if I wanted to, I could make this letter a little bit taller just by selecting that little tiny arrow that's in there. I'm just going to hit undo because I don't want to change these too much. But one of the things I can do is I can squish out this S and make it a little bit wider like yours is. I'm just going to use that horizontal button there, and I'm just squishing it out a little. So let's zoom out. See, it changed it in appearance some. The same thing could happen with the letter O. If I zoom in on it, I'm going to select the diamond in the middle. It has turned blue, and I'm just going to kind of widen it just a little bit, just to make it a little bit wider in appearance like this. Another thing you can do is you can come in here and you can click on what I call the wire line, and that is the little line that shows right around the edge of your object here. When you turn that on, by clicking on that wire line, all of these stitch angle buttons come up and other things that you can adjust here. So let's say, for example, that you wanted the stitch angles look really good, but let's just say that maybe you don't want this O to be quite as wide. You know, you can just grab one of these little the little nodes on here, and you can adjust those nodes. I'm going to zoom in pretty big here so we can get them right on top of one another. You know, and just to change the appearance of the letters. So, you know, you can do some little adjusting like that just by playing with the nodes on this design. Not saying that you have to, just giving you some options. I just right-clicked on that wire line and I added in a new node there. And, you know, all I'm doing is I'm just wiggling things around a little bit just to show you some different ways you can change the appearance of your objects. You know, yours actually looks a little bit squarish compared to what I just had here. So how about if we just move that out a little bit and made those upper ones just a little bit more square? All right, see? And it's not perfect, and I don't intend for it to. I'm just showing you some different options for how you can play with those letters. All right, we already talked about the fact that when it is selected, you can use the break apart tool, and that's how you can recolor your design. So let's say your letter M was the bright green, A I think was red, NI was black, correct? I think that's correct. And then the SOFT at the end was in that bright blue color. So I've changed your colors for you, and the next thing I'm going to do is just select them all, and I'm going to move them as an object. I'm going to select all of them. I'm going to right click. I'm going to group them, and I'm going to move them down on the screen just to get them out of the way for right now while we work on the upper part of your design. So the other thing I want to mention while we're here is, again, your fabric choice. Make sure that you have chosen the kind of fabric that you want to stitch this out on, because that is also going to determine the kinds of underlay and all that sort of thing that's going to happen on here. The other thing I'm going to mention to you is that this is a really tiny design. It's only going to stitch out at probably about 2.5 inches. Maybe that's how you intended it to be, because it's going to be on a t-shirt or something like that. But just keep that in mind, that that's actually rather small. And that's another reason for not having to make these letters exactly like they are on your printed logo, because from a distance, when this is on a garment, it really isn't going to make that much of a difference. What's going to make a difference, though, is that they are a good quality design. And the other thing is that things like how the sections of the design line up together are actually quite accurate. So what is the tool that I would use for creating this upper section of the design? In the digitize toolbar, I would use digitize closed shape. They're just simple little parallelograms and simple objects. So with that item selected, I'm just going to use my left mouse button, and I'm going to just do some quick digitizing here. I'm going to hold down my control key when I'm doing a vertical line and when I do horizontal lines, because it also keeps them straight within one another. Hit the enter button, and there it is. Let's select it. Let's turn it green right away, because that was green. Okay, and it has digitized it as a weave fill. And I talked about weave fills earlier because I told you that that's my preference for when you're digitizing things for garments, logos and that sort of thing. This object and this one here are identical, so you don't need to redigitize it. Your best bet is to just keep it selected. Excuse me there. Do a Control D to duplicate it. Here it is down in your toolbar. Let's turn the second one blue right away, and then use your arrow key on your keyboard to move it down into position. There you've got those two designs digitized. Do the same thing, digitize a closed shape for these ones here. I'm just going to start at the top, come down. I don't normally keep my mouse clicking when I'm digitizing. Let's turn that one into a blue right away. Come on. There we go. And if I really wanted to make sure that this angle here and this one here come out identical, you know, I could use that Control D again to duplicate that one. and I could move it over. And this time what I could do is I could just use my width and arrow button just by hovering over on top of this, and I could just drag it down to make it a little bit smaller. I don't know how small it needs to be. Let's kind of scooch it down and look at our, it needs to be a little bit taller than that. So about right there. All right. So that's all I did, was I just duplicated it. The last object on here is the big red part of your design. Hey, and pardon me, now that I'm looking at that, I kept calling that an A when I was doing that first video, and you probably thought I was nuts. I don't know why I called it A, but I was accidentally doing that, and I did it several times. So again, I'm just holding down my shift key, not my shift key, my control key when I'm doing these vertical and horizontals, just so they stay straight. And I just hit the enter button, and there's the other last part. Let's make it red. There it is. The next thing I would do, because this was one of my critiques in the earlier video, was that you needed to have all of these objects lined up on the bottom so that they didn't look all wonky. So let's select those last three things that we did. Right click, you can use an align and space, and let us align the bottom of them. So you might have noticed on the screen when I did that these two actually moved up so that they would align with that red part right there. All right, let's come up to our logo. Let's right click on it and unlock it, and then I'm going to hide it so that all we see on the screen is all of your digitized objects, and it looks pretty good. So it did digitize these as a satin line because they are tiny, and I'm going to turn on the measuring tool and measure across here. Actually, I've got this in inches, and I don't like to do inches when I'm doing measurements here. I really like to be in metric. Makes more sense to me because I can see how wide they actually are. So I'm turning on my toolbar, and this is only almost 2.5 millimeters wide, so super tiny. I think that would stitch out fine in a satin fill. I think that's fine like that is, but up here in the upper part of the design, you know, these aren't real large either. As I mentioned before, your logo is pretty small, and I think it's because you're going to put this on clothing. How wide is that? That's about 4 millimeters wide, 4.25 millimeters wide. Let's escape. Let's look at this one here. You know, 3.72, 3.25. You know, they're kind of narrow, so they may stitch out nicely in a satin fill. You know, and do some testing here, or you might want to keep them in a weave pattern. If you do want to keep them in a weave pattern, I would suggest, you know, playing around with the different fills that are available. I really like weave number 2. I think that it comes out quite nice, so I changed the red one into a weave number 2. I'm going to turn on the reshape tool, and let's take a look at that. What happens when you change your angle on here? I don't know why it's sticking so far out. Well, I do. Let's change it up to about a 49 degree angle and take a look at it. You know, and that might be a little bit more attractive. There's lots of different weave fills that you can use, as well as some embossed fills and different things, or you could stay with the satin. It's up to you what you want from your own logo. Your last step of this actual digitizing process would be that you would color sort these, you know, if you wanted to color sort them so that all of your blues stitched out together, and, you know, maybe your greens would stitch out together. So it's real easy to do that. You can just either, you know, select an object, and you can just, keeping it mouse button held down, you could just drag it up into position and do it simply like that. However you want to do it. Right now, what I would suggest doing also is that you would center this in your embroidery hoop. I did mention that to you earlier because it's going to be important that it's centered in your hoop when you send this to your embroidery machine. So let's select everything, not the logo, because that's not centered in the hoop right at this point. Let's do Control A. I'm going to ungroup this for now because there's some funny things going on here. So I'm just going to select everything, holding down my shift key. You know, this actually doesn't look centered. The word Manisoft doesn't look centered under that, does it? Is this selected? Let's do this. Select all of that, and let's just kind of two different ways you could use your alignment tools actually is let's group this. So I've dragged a box around it. I'm going to group it. I'm going to drag a box around my Manisoft word. I'm going to group that. Now I have these two things selected. So I'm holding down my control key, selecting both of them, right click, align and space, and let's align the centers vertically. So now this is an alignment with that. All right, and that's just a little bit better way to do this. Now let's control A. Make sure it didn't select the logo. Come over into your toolboxes. Let's go to create layouts. Auto center this to the work area. See this shadow? These little outlines? That's how far off of center this design was. All right, so when we hit the enter key, that has now moved this into the center of the hoop. We can see our grid now, and look at that. I'm just changing the, wanted to see my hoop. Okay, so there is all of that. So the last thing we would want to do, once you've got your design like you like it, and I'm not saying that mine's perfect, but this is how I would have digitized it. Earlier in the first video, I had mentioned about the spacing in between your big letter M and your name of your company, is that you might want to adjust the spacing a little bit. That's going to be dependent also on how this actually stitches out when you put it on some fabric, because some of that push and pull and all that might make a difference. So I'm recentering it again now that I changed that spacing there. So let's save this as a design. We're going to come to the output design. We're going to save it as an EMB design, and if I tried to save it here as a Hatch Manisoft, it would want to call it, ask me if I want to overwrite this. I'm going to call it number 2 Hatch Manisoft and save it. I want to say yes. I'm going to replace what I had there. All right, so now I've saved my original design, and I can come back into it, and it's going to be editable beautifully in the program. To make this into a stitch file to send to the machine, we're going to use the export design function. This is different from what you had in your old version of MBX. So it's already got its name. I know where I'm putting it. And actually, where do I want to put it? For this one, I'm going to stick it on my EMB USB stick. All right. So now it's saved as a stitch file, and it's also saved as an object file. So actually what I should have done before I saved it as a stitch file is I should have deleted the logo from here. I need to, where is it at? There it is, delete it. So Manisoft, let's delete. I don't know why it's not letting me delete it. But anyway, you wouldn't want to necessarily send that part of the design over as part of your stitch file. Okay, so there we are with your design, and that's how Faviola would have digitized it simply, and hopefully some of the little tips that I gave you are going to be helpful. Obviously, you wouldn't want to keep that like that, but I was just showing you some techniques. Okay, Alexa, Faviola signing off. Have fun with your logo. Bye for now.